Okay, so we're starting. So welcome everyone and thanks for coming. Welcome everyone online. I'm going to do the introduction in English first and then in Spanish for everyone. But I'm really happy and it's an honor to introduce our colleagues from Ireland to this talk. They're our colleagues in a very, very beautiful project we're starting from a few years ago, working with population exposed to the armed conflict in Colombia, particularly around Medellin. We actually met, I think in 3 days, we made the decision to collaborate in this project because we saw the funding opportunity and Cherie put her name in because she was interested to work in Colombia. So it's a pleasure to introduce Cherie, Martin, Emily, and Donica from Queen's University, Belfast. Cherie is, they're all from the School of Psychology, and Cherie works on many different projects and currently around anxiety, stress, depression, in many countries around the world, actually. Emily and Martin are postdocs in her group, and Donica works in modeling of, what is it? I'm going to get the name right. Modeling of a range of psychological conditions, and he's a big expert on statistical analysis to work on psychological data. So welcome. We are very happy that you're here. They're going to give a really nice talk that I'm just going to put a little bit about what we're doing in Colombia around the project and how it complements the psychological and clinical work. But the floor is all yours. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you, and thank you for everybody for coming to join us to listen to today's talk. So thank you for wonderful introductions. I'll not introduce myself again. So we go to the next slide. So the very first thing I wanted to do was just to give you a little bit of background and context as to where the funding came from, because I think that's important when we talk about any project. So this project is what we call bilateral funding, which means that we're funded via some funds from Colombia and then some funds from the United Kingdom. And I should clarify that we are based in Northern Ireland, which is officially part of the United Kingdom, which gives us access to these funds. So we secured funding from Colombia for the Census, and in the UK we secured our funding from the Newton Caldas Fund, which is part of the Economic and Social Research Council, which is one of our largest research councils, so it's a huge funder of all different types of research in the United Kingdom. The funding lasts for 3 years. The project officially started, you're very welcome, thank you. The funding officially started in February 2021, which means that the project runs through to January 2024. And this is a special funding call where they were really interested in that collaboration and partnership between academics in the UK and in Colombia with a focus on looking at PTSD. So PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, is specifically called for within the funding call. So that made it very useful for us, given our expertise in PTSD, so it made perfect sense. So I wanted to also tell you a little bit about PTSD because that's our main area of expertise in our lab at Queens, and because it's the core focus of this project that we're doing with our colleagues here in Colombia. So PTSD will be regarded as probably one of the most controversial psychiatric disorders known. Controversial because it has had lots of changes to the way in which those symptoms are described, the way the symptoms group together, how PTSD is classified within diagnostic and statistical manuals that are used by psychiatrists to direct services and so on. So it's a very controversial disorder, but also controversial because it's one of the only disorders that requires that traumatic life experience, first of all. So to have a diagnosis of PTSD, you must also have disclosed a traumatic life experience. So controversial in that sense, and it's very complex. If we think about trauma, just to clarify this, because often what happens is when we say the word trauma, people think of a physical injury, but what we're talking about here is a traumatic life event that results in a psychological injury. So trauma is something that's often sudden and unpredictable. It really is that sense of having a threat to your own life or to the life of other people, and it feels really out of a person's control, so it's often very overwhelming for someone in that emotional space. And it's also important to say that, well, I guess surprisingly, trauma is very popular at a population level. So lots and lots of people will experience the trauma in their lifetime. And if we look at that at a population level, we've got some studies that say 95% of people will experience a traumatic life event. However, for the individual person, it's that event that is unexpected, sudden, overwhelms people. So it's not common within individuals, even though it's common across the population. And also at the heart of PTSD's complexity is that there's lots and lots of things that might predict from when someone has a traumatic life event, lots of things in the middle that predict how you're going to respond after that event on those pathways that suggest whether you'll develop PTSD or whether you'll be resilient to that experience, so you won't have a PTSD outcome. There's lots of pieces in the middle, and that's where we try to focus our study. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Martin now.
Thank you. So Cherie's given a bit of background on what we focus on in terms of PTSD, but I wanted to introduce a little bit about why we're here. Why are we traveling from the UK to Colombia to work on this project? The context of Colombia comes as no surprise to everyone here that there has been an extended period of conflict over 57 years with 220,000 casualties and over 9 million people displaced. As Cherie discussed, the trauma is widespread. The experience of trauma is widespread throughout the population, with 95% of people worldwide experiencing a trauma, and this is true in Colombia as well. Displacement, Colombia has the highest level of internally displaced persons of anywhere in the world, and is significantly higher, and the rate is even increasing as of 2020. And there's a large degree of economic inequality throughout the country, where some individuals have and some individuals have not, which Cherie has briefly mentioned. There are a number of factors that influence the complexity of PTSD, and these are just some factors that can increase or decrease the risk of developing PTSD. But as time went on, in Colombia, the ceasefire was called in 2011. And this has led to a period of recovery and reconciliation, including the PEDT program, where the government has devised and implemented, where the Colombian government is seeking to promote health and well-being, particularly mental well-being among those affected by the conflict here in the country. The community of victims, local authorities, and the Agency for Territory Renovation have all focused on this widespread plan to revamp the economic activity in the country and promote good health and well-being for all the people in it. So the answer to why are we here from the UK, from Northern Ireland, we have a very unique experience like La Valencia called the Troubles. In Northern Ireland, we were affected by a period of ethno-political conflict where people of different identities were engaged in civil conflict, much like here. And this went on between 1968 and 1998. We're a little bit further away from this memory of conflict in the country. So we've taken our expertise both in PTSD and in our area, learning from the events in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland does continue to experience sectarian violence and a lot of tension in the region, despite it being so many years since the end of the Troubles. But it's not all bad news. Northern Ireland has had the highest population of PTSD recognised in World Mental Health Surveys, but researchers and clinicians have worked extremely hard in the area to continue to address the legacy of the Troubles, and we hope to translate this to addressing the legacy of La Valencia. It's also worth noting that Colombia and Northern Ireland uniquely are two of the only regions in the world that have successfully moved on from a period of civil conflict and engaged in peaceful establishment of government following this area or this period of time. And I'll pass over to Cherie, who is the expert in talking about risk and resilience factors that might be featuring in this study.
Thank you, Martin. So a second ago, I mentioned about that multitude of things or factors that might predict whether someone's going to develop PTSD outcome or not. And I wanted to just orientate you to some of these. So if you think about someone experiencing a traumatic life event, that traumatic life event can be something such as a motor vehicle accident, or it can be something like sexual assault or physical assault, or we have exposure to events that happen during the course of natural disasters. So there's quite a broad array of traumatic events that can happen. So one of the very first things we're interested in when we try to think about that risk and resilience pathway is, what does that trauma look like? So what is the trauma? How frequently did that trauma occur? What was the severity of the trauma? Did it happen to someone when they were a child? Did it happen to someone in adulthood? So we try to unpick that trauma history, and we know that different traumas have a different risk as to whether someone's going to develop PTSD. So that's the first piece of the puzzle that we try to look at. And then we also know that someone's life events, so not necessarily traumatic life experiences, but other kind of stressors within someone's life can impact on how well they cope with their traumatic life event. So if people are having economic problems with finances, or people are having relationship breakdowns, for example, then those daily stressors that people might be able to cope with in normal circumstances can add to the risk of a poor outcome after they experience a traumatic life event. So what's going on in someone's life. When we think about demographic risk factors, we also know that females are twice as likely to develop a post-traumatic stress disorder compared to males when they experience exactly the same trauma event. So if two individuals are in the same car crash, for example, it's much more likely that the female rather than the male will go on to develop post-traumatic stress outcome. And this is something that is repeatedly shown in the evidence time after time. And the risk factor is twice as likely compared to the male. Another thing that we like to look at is someone's social environment and how supported someone feels within that environment. So we talk a lot about social support. Now, social support is used as an umbrella term, and it's often used as like this one entity. But we know that you can break social support down, and social support can be the support that you feel from your immediate family. It can be the support that you get from friends, from colleagues at work, and also the support that you get from the wider community. All of those things, if you feel supported, then you're less likely to have a PTSD outcome after trauma, and those who don't feel supported are much more likely to become ill. When we think about psychiatric history, this is also another important piece of the puzzle, because those who have pre-existing psychological disorders like depression and anxiety are more likely to develop PTSD after trauma. Those who have a psychiatric history within their family are more likely to develop PTSD after being exposed to trauma. And actually, the psychiatric history piece is interesting because we see that from studies that focus on the kind of biological lineage in families, but also that psychosocial lineage as well. So it's an important piece. And then that takes us straight into the genetics. And I know that Natasha's going to talk a little bit about the role of neuralizing ones, so I'm going to skip past that in the detail at the moment. And finally, I want to say about emotion regulation. So there's lots of things that we understand and we understand quite well, but then there's some new players in the puzzle, and the new players are kind of the genetics and the emotion regulation piece. So we're starting to look at this in our lab, and just for those to understand emotion regulation, those who are able to regulate their emotions in times of stress are less likely to develop psychological conditions after trauma. But those who don't handle their own emotions well, so those who emotionally dysregulate, and this is some of the work that Emily in particular does, those who are not able to handle their emotions, then they are more likely to develop PTSD afterwards. So you're probably thinking, well, that's a lot of stuff going on, right? And it is a lot of stuff going on, and this is psychology, because we live in our social world. You know, we're interested in people, and we're interested in the behaviour, but all of these things impact on us as individuals. So it's a lot of work to work through all these risk and resilience factors and look at those pathways. So in that space, what we do is we work under this approach called the biosexual approach, and that's where we're interested in these different pieces of the puzzle, but we try to group that together. So we group it together in terms of biological risk factors. You see this bit here, the genetic markers, and then psychological risk factors, so how people cope, how people regulate their emotions, and also how people think about and understand and praise their traumatic life events and other things, other experiences within their life. So that's the psychology bit. And then we've got the social bit, so people's social world. So remember I spoke about social support, so that comes into it, how people feel connected within their own communities and people's sense of identity as well, and how they connect within the communities with their social identity. So that's all the pieces coming together under these categories. I'm going to hand back to Martin now. Martin's going to break that down in our logic model in terms of the design of our study.
So Cherie's giving you an overview of the biological, psychological, and social factors that feed into PTSD that we're examining as part of this project. As part of a logic model, this talks about this displays how we think the relationship happens between socio-demographic variables and those traumatic life events, all the way over to PTSD and other mental health outcomes. But it happens via those factors that we talked about. So Cherie highlighted some of the most important factors that we've identified from the international literature. What the other research has told us is important in the development of PTSD. Those psychological factors can be things such as coping, how well you can draw on skills in your mind to cope with stressors as they come up. Emotional regulation, like Cherie mentioned, that our lab in Northern Ireland has done quite a bit of work on about moderating your emotions and coping whenever things do stress you out. Appraisals, how you think about your traumatic experience and how you dealt with it, and being cognitively flexible and being able to change up how you deal with these things. The social mechanisms or processes that can lead to PTSD and other mental health outcomes are social support, like Cherie mentioned, and biological factors such as neurological or indeed other genetic markers that might influence how PTSD and other mental health outcomes come about. We focus a lot on this project as it is central to what we designed and applied for around PTSD. However, we have to go beyond PTSD. We, as psychologists, know that PTSD is highly comorbid. In other words, it co-occurs with a lot of other mental health disorders. So looking beyond PTSD, we want to know if the same biopsychosocial predictors, those coping strategies, those social support networks, and those genetic factors predict PTSD, but also other mental health outcomes such as depression and anxiety that are very, very common. We're interested in understanding how these disorders might come about, but we're also interested in positive outcomes, how people are resilient following trauma, and how these factors might promote better well-being. For example, if you have more social support, better connection with your friends and family, does this predict that you're going to recover more and more from a traumatic experience?
So I just wanted to tell you a little bit now about the collaboration for this particular project. I'm going to go through this quite fast, so I'm conscious of time. But what you can see here is that Vida is a collaboration of interdisciplinary researchers. So because we have the biopsychosocial model, we need the biology people, the psychology people, so we have to kind of bring it all together. So what happens in a project like this is that we have different strands of work. So you can see here that the people on the left of the screen from Queens, so myself, Donica, Emily, Martin, who are with us today, and then also our colleague Gary Hardiman from Queens. So Gary's actually quite a unique case, I'll explain in a second. But what you have here is you have your 4 psychologists, and the 4 psychologists are handling the psychosocial aspects. So we're really looking at the psychology and the social environment piece. Darren Hardiman is actually a biologist who's based at Queens. So even though he's based at Queens, he's going to be working alongside colleagues at Los Angeles, which is Dr. Veronica Anca Alvarez and Dr. Natasha Bock, who are handling the kind of biology stuff and the genetics piece. So that's the collaboration between Queens and Los Angeles. And then, of course, it would be remiss of me not to mention our other partners who are working at the various hospital sites. So a very key partner here for us is Dr. Felipe Gillian. So Felipe is one of the individuals who's based in the LMCI and the ICVC. And these are actually our two main recruitment sites. So they were working alongside these institutions to help recruit patients into the study. Okay, so just to kind of summarize that again, you have the psychosocial stream, the work package, and then we have the biological work package. And I think we've covered that enough, so we'll skip on. Ultimately, the main aim of this research is that we want to understand which of those risk factors, be it biology, psychology, or sociology, which of those have the most impact or the most risk for a PTSD outcome, and then on the inverse, which of those are most useful in protecting people against the development of PTSD. So we have to bring this all together to really see which of them move that needle. So if you think about someone having a traumatic life experience, which of those risk factors will increase the risk for PTSD or decrease the risk for PTSD so people are more resilient. And to do this, we have two parallel streams. We have the clinical patients stream, which is the Queens bit, which is the longitudinal survey design, and then we have the biobehavioral piece, which is working out of Natasha and Veronica's lab with the zebrafish. So I just want to explain that a little bit. So in terms of the clinical piece, the aim here is we're going to recruit 500 people and we're going to screen them first for trauma. So every single person in the study will have been exposed to a traumatic life event. That's the eligibility criteria. Of those, we then screen them for post-traumatic stress disorder and we put them into two groups. So those who have PTSD and those who don't, right? And then what we want to do is follow those up over 3 time points over a period of 12 months. Now, it's important to know that at time 1, we get all patients, whether they're PTSD positive or not, to give us a saliva sample. And that saliva sample is key to joining those two pieces together that we'll explain in a second. So time 1, they give us a saliva sample and we do a psychological survey. But in the psychological survey is where we pick up all that psychosocial stuff about their life, about their psychology, and about their social world. And then we do another survey in time 2 and another survey in time 3. But the important piece here is that those surveys are shorter because we front load the survey to maximize that psychosocial data that we collect when we have shorter pieces afterwards. And all survey data and management analysis will be done at Queen's University. And this is the point that I believe I hand over to Natasha. No, one more slide. So just to quickly say about that saliva sample as well. So the saliva sample is important because we will collect these saliva samples from all patients at time 1. But then the important piece is that will be transferred to a lab at King's College in London. And we have colleagues at King's College in London that will analyse that saliva data for us. And they will give us the genome informatic data that we will send back to Los Angeles, to Natasha and Veronica. And then we will also hold that at Queen's. And also, if there's any spare saliva, that's going to go to Gary Hardiman's lab at Queen's as well for future analysis. And now I will hand over to Natasha.
So this is where we're going to link everything, and this is why this project is actually called a translational project. And the interesting this is studying the genetic basis of psychological disorders and behavior has been the focus of research over many decades because these tend to be very complex traits. They're not like height in a person or the color of our eyes, where it's usually one or a few genes that control that trait. Behavior tends to be a very complex trait. And as Cherie explained very beautifully, it's a very complex trait to phenotype as well. It's very hard to get to classify that phenotype and to get to define that phenotype over like a large population. So what we want to do here is use an animal model that, like the zebrafish, that has a lot of homolog genes to humans. So it's a valid model for the study of behavior, where we know how to study stress behavior. And we want to not only identify what is causing this resilience or this how bad people get PTSD, but also we can study how the control of behavior in the brain changes when these genetic mutations are being changed. So there's some studies in the past that have been done and have identified hundreds of genes that are associated in one way or another with the development of PTSD and the change in stress response in humans. One of these genes is neurolegin 1. This is a gene, I'm not going to go into a lot of technical details so I don't bore you, but it's a gene involved in the synapses in the brain. And we are planning on doing a line in zebrafish where this gene is knocked out. The purpose of doing this is being able to study how the behavior of this gene of these fish that are knocked out changes in the absence of neurolegin 1. So we want to know, investigate the role of this gene in the stress response by studying it in a fish that doesn't have it. So we can do behavioral experiments in both in larvae and in adult fish, in lines that are wild type, that means that they express neurolegin 1 in a normal way, versus lines that are a neurolegin knockout, to study the stress response in these two lines of fish. If you change the slide, we're also going to do something that's called comparative transcriptomics. And the purpose of these experiments is to know what changes in the brain when neurolegin 1 is absent, because we know that behaviors are not handled by one mutation or one gene turning on and off. We know that behavior is mediated in the brain by the complex activation of hundreds of genes in the brain. So when we're doing this, we're basically trying to identify which biological cascades in the brain are altered in the absence of neurolegin 1. So this is an experiment where we're going to look at pretty much all the genes that are turned on in the brain in a wild-type fish that has not been exposed to stress protocol, in a fish that has been exposed to stress. This is the wild-type fish. And then we're gonna do the same thing in the brain of a neurolegin knockout fish that has not been exposed to stress and one that has been exposed to stress. And we basically compare all the genes that are turned on in the brain of these 4 categories of fish. And by identifying the cascades that are different in this knockout, we're going to, we hope to identify what changes in the brain of these fish that don't have neurolegin 1 and hopefully identify this stress response routes that are essential to handle stress. Why is this important? Because it can tell us what are the core stress response biological routes that we can go and study in humans later. And we can connect our project in fish to humans exposed to the armed conflict in Madeira. So this is basically the purpose of the whole project. So we're using the fish to get candidates, to get routes, to identify how the brain handles stress, and we can later go and see how these routes are changing in people in the study populations that have different degrees of symptoms of PTSD. I think, so where are we at now? We're just going to give you a very quick tour of our results. So in order to do this, as I said, we had to create a CRISPR line that where the neurolegin 1 gene is a knockout. The problem with neurolegin 1 is that when we knock it out, we can't really see whether it's knocked out or not. So in order to establish the protocol, we started doing a tyrosine assay, where it's this gene that causes the pigmentation you see over here. So Andrea did all this work, and she's been knocking out this gene because it has a visible phenotype in order to get the CRISPR protocol to work. And as you can see, these little larvae that were injected when the embryo had only one cell, so that all the cells in the fish hopefully have the mutation or the knockout, is that we have some fish where the gene is completely knocked out and so they don't express any pigment, their eyes and the body of the fish doesn't have any pigment. And then we see some degree of variation in this phenotype in fish that where the knockout worked to different degrees. The good news is that Andrea managed to get a very high percentage of this fish with a knockout and a very good survival rate for this fish. So now we're finishing establishing the protocol and getting CRISPR to work with this visible phenotype so that we can move on to do CRISPR on neurolesion and hopefully establish a line that doesn't express neurolesion 1. And I think now I give the microphone back. We're not going to these little passes.
So I just wanted to try to pull some of that stuff together. And a minute ago I said, like, remember the saliva sample and how important the saliva sample is. I know Natasha has just touched on this, but because we have the saliva sample from the patients who have PTSD and those who don't, and then we have the results from Natasha and Andrea's work in terms of the zebrafish, then what we can do is we can look at the saliva samples and see the role of neurolesion 1 in humans who have or have not developed a PTSD outcome. And then that pulls the two different strands together. So hopefully this lovely graphic that I cannot take credit for, this was Martin who made this, hopefully that can just demonstrate that it all pulls together. And ultimately, when we have the biopsychosocial data, what we want to do is put it all into a big melting pot, essentially, and then use some statistical models in the form of machine learning. And we want to run statistical models that do an algorithmic prediction of risk for a particular outcome. So we will see, out of all of the biology, the psychology and the social stuff, which of those are rank ordered in terms of being the most important. Now, we already know that lots of those things are going to be important. In fact, arguably all of them are potentially important in terms of predicting risk for PTSD. But what we're trying to do here is clean that up a little bit and then see which are more important versus less important. And we should be able to do that through this machine learning model. And because we have multiple ways of data collection, remember I said we have time 1 surveys, time 2, time 3, then we can also do other analysis from a psychology perspective that shows us how people express their psychopathology across time and whether certain risk or resilience factors in time 1 are important for outcomes in time 3. So we're doing some longitudinal modelling in that space as well. And that will help us identify those mechanisms of change. And when you identify mechanisms of change, what happens is you end up with targets that you can then use for the development of interventions or treatments to support people who do have a post-traumatic stress disorder outcome. Okay, so Martin's going to do a quick data snapshot of where we're at with the survey data.
So, like Veronica or like Natasha just got to highlight the biological results. I'm going to give a very small snapshot of the psychosocial data from the surveys that we've already collected. The surveys began in February 2022, and since then we've recruited 194 people, which is 38% of the people that we wanted to collect. We screened all participants for trauma exposure, and all of these 194 people have experienced some sort of trauma in their lifetime. And on average, when people begin the survey, they complete 96% of those questions. And there are a lot of things to ask, as Cherie's highlighted in the presentation. The trauma experiences that we see in the data set so far, caveated that this is only a small sample of everyone that we're asking questions of. The most commonly reported traumatic experiences were physical assault, with 97 people reporting experiencing physical assault in their life. Almost half of these were related to La Valencia. 91 people reported experience of combat exposure, and almost all of these people reported that it was related to La Valencia. There were a number of other traumatic experiences in the survey. We asked about a large number. It's a standardized set of trauma experiences that's recognized around the globe and is used in many psychological surveys. However, we wanted to ask one question that isn't on the standardized list about forced displacement, which is unique here in Colombia and in a lot of other contexts, but really goes under-acknowledged as a potentially traumatic experience. When we asked it of the sample, 145 out of the 194 people that we have surveyed so far have experienced forced displacement in municipalities, and almost all of these people said it is related to La Valencia. And once again, caveating that this is just our little small sample, we wanted to recruit an even number of people with and without PTSD. So far, we have 115 people in the control group, people without a PTSD outcome, and 79 people with a PTSD outcome. We determined this by looking at whether or not people reach a cutoff score on the PTSD measure. We asked them a number of questions and score these based on how strong their symptoms are. The scale for PTSD ranges from 0 to 80, but in our data set, the highest range we've seen is from 0 to 68. And we've applied a cutoff score of 33, which is an internationally recognized number to determine whether or not people probably have or have not gone to develop PTSD following their traumatic experience. I'm going to hand over to Cherie for the final slides on policy and practice impacts of our work.
Thank you. So I think when we talk about a project like this, it often leaves that question in people's mind, well, why? Why are you doing all this? What difference is it going to make? And that's where we really need to focus on the policy impacts. So when we apply for this funding at the beginning, it was really important to the funders, to Maestría and to the Research Council in the UK, that actually the work that we do has an impact for the population. So we can cause positive change to the people who have been exposed to armed conflict in Colombia. So that's exactly what we want to do. We already know that people who have been exposed to armed conflict in Colombia will suffer from mental ill health concerns. So the need is already there, but how do we provide that evidence base so that we can then use that evidence to leverage government and policymakers to then create more services to support people? So that's the policy impact, and ultimately this work will inform the PDEP program, so the development programs with a territorial approach, promoting peace and development in Colombia. And the Ministry of Health and National Mental Health Promotion Activities have so far spent over £1 trillion between 2020 and 2023. So we really want them to direct that into the people who have been exposed to armed conflict, who are currently suffering with PTSD, and use the evidence that we provide to, in turn, develop interventions and treatments that can prevent people or cure people ultimately from the post-traumatic stress disorder. And in doing that will increase the overall quality of life, and in turn it actually saves governments except for money, because people become citizens who can contribute back into society and so on, because they don't have those functional impairments or occupational impairments that come alongside post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health outcomes. So essentially what we're going to do is offer rich information on the biological, psychological and social targets for future clinical intervention. And another piece of this whole puzzle is that in doing this work, we raise awareness of these issues in the population who are often suffering in silence. So they have issues, they know that they're not functioning very well psychologically, but they don't quite understand why. So this is psychosocial education, so we educate them into why they're having difficulties and then how they can help seeking help. So that's one other piece of it, but also we raise awareness in people who provide services. So people who support those exposed to armed conflict may not immediately think about the psychological health and well-being. They may be focused on other aspects like finances or community support or a whole array of things, not specifically on psychological health and well-being. So we're raising awareness in people themselves and the people who support them. And then that helps people to help seek. And it reduces stigma around all of this as well. So that is the end of our presentation. I absolutely appreciate that was a lot of information and a lot of information in English. So please do feel free to ask any questions if you have any questions of the study, and you can direct your questions to myself, Natasha, or Martin.
Someone will mediate the questions with people that are online.
Okay.
And if someone doesn't want to ask in English, I'll be happy to translate. So feel free to ask whatever question you have, even if it's in Spanish. Los que están virtuales, si quieren hacer alguna pregunta, la pueden poner en el chat y yo la leo.
I have a question for the people who have PTSD. Do they have any kind of intervention between time 1 and time 3?
No, there's no intervention between time 1 and time 3, because that's actually, thank you for bringing that up, because that's a really important point about this study. This study in and of itself is not to provide psychological therapies to people. This study is to identify those risk and resilience pathways so that we can then inform those who in turn provide services and support. So we're creating evidence base, not providing psychological therapies and treatment.
But then what would be the difference between those time points in that population?
The difference between
Yes.
the time points, so time 1 to time 3 will last over a 12-month period. And what we know about PTSD is PTSD has a natural ability to decline if the environment is right. So when we're doing our statistical models, we can control for things that might result in declines or uplifts in terms of symptomatology. So we do take that into consideration.
So are you expecting, how are you expecting movement in your case will happen? Like it will get worse or better? Or what do you, what are you, and also what are the expectations you have when there in the people? What's the cultural effect that could do something with the diagnostics and the
So the first part of that then is about how PTSD typically develops over time. We have done some work in this space, and what we've discovered is that PTSD typically has 4 different trajectories. So it's, if you take the whole population of people who've been exposed to trauma, you will see a subgroup of individuals who remain psychologically ill at quite a high level, and that's chronic across time. You'll have another subpopulation who remain quite ill to begin with, but they have a decrease in their symptomatology, so that's a recovery trajectory. There's also a subpopulation who start off okay to begin with, and then all those life stressors and things kind of activate their PTSD and they have an increase in the trajectory. And then we have that group who are low and stable, so people who are psychologically well to begin with and who will remain well across the way. That's the resilient group. And there's, I mean, we published a study on this where we looked at PTSD symptomatology over a 20-year period in people who had been exposed to military combat in Israel. So we were able to track them across 20 years. I was not involved in the first data collection, but was able to jump in later. So, but it's good to see the 20-year trajectory, and there's lots of other studies using different trauma populations, like people who have being experienced a rape or a sexual assault. They follow those same trajectories. So it would be very surprising to us if we don't see those trajectories over those 3 waves. But who knows, because that work hasn't been done in Colombia, and that's part of the benefit of this, to add to that. In terms of our expectations of meeting with people when we spend the rest of the week going out to the various sites and recruit people, I'm going to be honest, I'm nervous. A little bit nervous about it because the language is going to be a barrier from our perspective first and foremost, and also we definitely don't want to in any way, shape or form be perceived as, coming in and trying to save people, because that's not the intention at all. We're coming in a fully fledged partnership model with our colleagues from Los Angeles to see if we can use our expertise in any way to help make the situation better for people who've been exposed to armed conflict. but we're super kind of concerned about like cultural sensitivities, and that's where we're very much guided by our colleagues at Los Angeles, and we put a lot of time and effort and discussion into that at the very beginning, even in terms of the question format in the surveys and how we ask those questions and in what context, because it's so important that we don't understand your cultural context the way that you do, so we don't make those assumptions. We're working in partnership with our colleagues.
So we have a couple of questions online. The first one is from IBIO, who asked how were the subjects recruited in Valledupar and through which organization?
Okay.
The patients that have been recruited to the survey are recruited in Valledupar through Instituto Cardiovascular and in Barranquilla through LMCI. It's a partnership with the hospitals, and the medicals that are working very, very hard and are in touch with us a lot about the recruitment process.
Yeah. Just a slight addition to that, we host what we call recruitment events. So we do invite groups of individuals to come along to a day event where we ask them to complete the surveys. We take the saliva sample, we provide them with snacks and drinks, and we also provide them with financial cover for their transport, and we provide them with an incentive for participation, because again, we appreciate that people are giving up their time and talking about their life experiences, and it's their story to share with us. It's not our story to take from them. So we want to make sure that they're properly incentivized and that they are in no way disadvantaged financially or otherwise through participation in the survey.
I think I might have a little bit there, because I think a huge challenge of this project has been recruitment, because we have to keep in mind that these are people that don't live in the city and are used to go to the psychiatrist. So we recruited people that live in a lot of areas around the region. Sometimes they live really far away, and it's really hard for them to get to these events. So we found that it's a lot easier for them to just come to these organized events as opposed to recruiting through psychiatrists, because not a lot of them actually make appointments with a psychiatrist, unfortunately. So we have a second question from Pablo Arbeláez, and he's saying, thank you for this inspiring talk. We typically refer to La Violencia as the period between 1948 and 58 that started the larger armed conflict that we are still enduring. Are you referring to that specific decade or to the larger conflict? And he has a second question, how do you plan to analyze the DNA samples from people and fish jointly? So maybe you can answer the first and I'll go to the fishy stuff afterwards.
So it's a really great question. Thank you. We refer to the La Violencia in the survey and in our results as the term, but we're really talking about the wider conflict in Colombia that went all the way up until the ceasefire in 2011. And I believe we should refer to La Violencia a lot in the survey and in our results, as we think of things like from our perspective in Northern Ireland of having a similar conflict, the Troubles, but that has an end date, like was pointed out many years ago, but still goes on to affect a lot of people.
And also just to bring it back to the individual. So the important thing, of course, we have the entire conflict, and this is what we talk about in Northern Ireland. We have the whole conflict, which is a period of time. But when we're talking about someone's psychology and their psychological well-being, we're interested in their life experiences and whether those life experiences have been traumatic life events that we may all be exposed to at some point, or whether those experiences are specific to the armed conflict, and we'll be able to look at that in the end when we have those results too.
And Pablo, to answer your second question about the genetics. So when we think about the genetics that we're going to do with the saliva samples in humans, there's two things we can do with that. The first one is to, let's say, independent of the fish data, we're going to look at genetic markers that are different between people that have been diagnosed with PTSD and the group of people that we use as a control, so people that don't have PTSD. That's the first thing. The other thing is that we can look at how genetic markers are segregating compared to other ethnicities, because this is the first study of PTSD in Colombia, even in Latin America, if I'm not mistaken. So it's very important to see if there are genetic markers that can relate to PTSD that are different to other ethnicities. So not only how they relate to the intensity of the symptoms and whether the symptoms were related in any way to the armed conflict and la violencia, but also to the ethnicity of the individuals, because our genes can give us different sensitivities to the development of certain behavioral disorders. And then with the fish work, what we're gonna do, as I described the transcriptomics, is that we're hoping to identify a whole cascade of genes that are affected by the knockout of neurologen 1, and especially that are involved in handling stress responses. So we're hoping to identify those genes and then look at our human data and see whether those genes have accumulated mutations or are evolving faster in any way. So that this is how we're gonna, in a way, inform the human analysis with the data that we're gonna get from the fish. Thank you. Andres, and then.
You're just identifying the factors that influence original resonance. Are you planning to do some kind of scale or to put some weight in different factors to see which has or would have more weight into the evolution of the PTSD?
Yeah, so that's, I guess, when we're talking about those different risk and resilience factors in psychology, we use standardized measures for those risk and resilience. So we have a specific set of questions that we can ask someone about, for example, whether they feel supported, so a social support measure, and then we can score that measure up. And when we get those scores, what we do is we develop a big data set that has the biological data, the psychological data, and the social data. And then all of those variables, essentially, that represent the different constructs, we'll analyze those using machine learning. And the purpose of machine learning is that it will give you ultimately a ranked list of, for example, social support might be one of your most important risk factors, which would be a hypothesis of ours given the wealth of evidence there that, I mean, social support is probably one of the most identified protective factors against the development of PTSD. So we imagine when we do the machine learning with all of the data together that we get that list.
But the objective is would be like do that for general population, or that the model can be able to put different way to a specific people.
Oh, okay, yeah. So we can subdivide the entire data set and say we only want to look at people who have, for example, said that their trauma was specific to their conflict, and we can run a model on that. Or we can do the model on everybody, or we can do the model on people who have been diagnosed with depression. So we can slice and dice the
Because it will be an amazing tool if you can just put the data of one patient to the model and to see which factor in that specific patient is more important. So for the treatments.
So there is a complication over sample size and how we can run statistical models. So we would be unlikely to do that in an individual person level, but we can definitely do it in subcategories.
I think, yeah, I have a question about the age of the subjects. Have a target for a specific range of age, at least if the prolonged time in a stressful situation makes the PTSD go the same, like continuously with time.
So we have an age range that we ask people's age, and then that will give us an age range in the data. And often what happens when we're running these statistical models is some variables are what we regard as control variables. So if we think age is a potential source of bias, then we control for age within the statistical models. So we can definitely look at that, and we can look at age as an objective variable as well.
I'm asking because of the time that person was exposed to the stressful situation.
Oh yes, so what we do is we do a full screen of their trauma history. So we ask them what type of trauma did you experience? What age were you when you experienced that? Have you experienced other traumas? So remember I had the slide where I kind of went around all the different potential risk factors. So we really do ask a lot of information about people's trauma, and then we can look at whether, for example, the differences in their trauma histories predict particular outcomes. Because another thing that's well established in the literature is the cumulative risk of traumatic life experiences. So if you are a person who has had 3, 4, 5 traumas, then your risk of a PTSD outcome is increased compared to someone who has only had experienced 1 trauma. But then there's a kind of caveat to that as well, that as soon as you experience the trauma, your risk of re-victimization is increased. So as soon as you're exposed to the trauma, the way in which that works is your vulnerability and your risk of subsequent traumas is typically increased, and that's called re-victimization. There's a whole different body of literature on why that is the case.
Do we have more questions? Well, thank you very much for coming. We're really happy to have you here to hear about this project. And I also want to thank you guys again. I think I speak for Veronica as well, couldn't be here, but it's been a very beautiful project for us. I think it's an opportunity for me to feel that my fish research is actually contributing in some way to getting over the armed conflict that has weighed on this country for so long. So I think for all of us at Columbia's, it's a very, very nice project to work in. Thank you everyone for coming, and they are also giving a talk tomorrow at the medical school in the Centro de Prácticas tomorrow at 11 if someone's interested. And thank you everyone in the audience, the virtual audience, for coming as well.